As many as 3 million people died from COVID-19 in the global pandemic of 2020. People of all walks of life and beliefs died. And then there were those who also died because they delayed health care for other conditions. Back then, my future husband would say, "Ebbs, we're gonna get through this pandemic healthy and get things back on track for our wedding." But sadly, that day never came. On February 9th, 2021, my fiance, Therese Paler, a national NFL journalist, died. Therese did not die from COVID, but like other families who lost their loved ones with little to no warning, I immediately understood this type of pain. My name is Ebony Reed. I'm a journalist, a media executive, a fundraiser now for scholarships in Therese's name. I'm also a professor and soon-to-be published author, and a person moving my life forward after the death of my partner. I've used the word fearless to create points in this talk. And those of us moving through this experience are fearless, even when we don't recognize it. The acronym FEARLESS helps us think through these points. Frame specific questions in the now, encourage strong self-care, acknowledge milestones, respect the individuality of healing, learn to reframe and reset relationships, establish boundaries, support continuous counseling, show grace for yourself and others. What exactly is grief? And why is it that the loss of a spouse or partner is one of the most devastating losses that a person can endure? The Mayo Clinic defines grief as a strong emotion for a person that we loved and lost. And one reason that life is hard for a surviving spouse or partner is that they've lost the person that they shared hopes, dreams, and future plans with. Like others who've lost their loves, I sometimes think back to how things began. I've learned that it's healthy to honor our time together while I'm also moving my life forward. Like many modern day romances, Therese and I were connected via Facebook Messenger by a mutual friend in 2016. It was a connection that was 3 years in the making, and I initially resisted the introduction, saying that I was in first grade when he was a newborn, so I knew even as adults I would be too advanced for him. Therese was amused and persistent. Our mutual friend was also tickled at my response, but after a swift courtship that included trips and cards, flowers, and candies from our favorite Kansas City chocolate shop, I moved back to Missouri from Boston to join Therese, just as he predicted. We used to privately joke that my new job at my alma mater, which came with the relocation package, was really just an early wedding gift for us. 6 weeks before the pandemic, we moved into our new home in Kansas City, and somehow, some way, we celebrated in the upcoming year that we had survived 5 NFL reporting seasons together, and we're finally making plans for our wedding. The day that Therese died was a regular day. He was only 37. He did his radio talk show from his upstairs home office. I made a meal, and we were planning our upcoming staycation. I have learned so much in the last few years moving through this experience with the support of grief counseling and grief support groups. So let's go back to the word fearless so I can tell you more about what I now know. Frame specific questions in the now. One of the hardest questions that a person grieving can answer is, how are you doing? So I've learned to ask, how much sleep did you get last night? What did you eat for breakfast? What are your plans for this upcoming weekend? I try not to ask people who are grieving and have had an immediate loss, how they're doing, because I honestly know how hard it is to answer that question. Encourage. Encourage strong self-care. Everybody wants to do something when there's a loss. And one of the best things that neighbors, friends, coworkers can do is encourage strong self-care. That means supporting counseling, meditation, exercise, and other healthy outlets. If you know that a grieving person has children or pets or elderly relatives, you might offer to sit with them so that they can have the time and the space to do these things for themselves. Now, let me caution, this is not a moment for unsolicited advice or to pepper a newly bereaved person with questions about where they will live, work, or how they will spend the rest of their lives, unless you're facing a very serious imminent crisis. Acknowledge. Acknowledge milestones. Milestones are different for all of us, and that's important for us to understand as people who've lost, but also for the people who love, work, and interact with us. And as we hit these milestones, such as returning to work, traveling, eating in a restaurant solo for the first time in a long time, or even stepping out with our friends without our spouse or our partner, that we acknowledge it takes a lot of tenacity to do this. And this is when we're being fearless, even if we don't recognize it. Respect. Respect the individuality of healing. Healing is not a linear process. I can think back and recall people encouraging me to try to move everything out of my house quickly that reminded me of Therese. And then there were those who said that I needed to move from a home that I loved and I built with him. That was hurtful, and I wondered, had any of these people stopped to think about what they want people to someday say to their loved ones? I have learned in my healing that Therese is always, always in my heart, but it does not preclude me from enjoying myself, taking on new adventures, or even loving again. Learn. Learn how to reframe and reset existing relationships. Those of us who've lost know that nothing will ever be the same without our partners and spouses, but we can move forward and learn to reframe and reset existing relationships. I like to call this life housekeeping. And y'all, I learned how to do this really well after Therese passed away. It is normal and natural after a loss that relationship circles will change, they will expand, and they will possibly even contract. Establish boundaries. After loss, when so much seems like it's out of our control, it is also normal and natural to establish boundaries. And for the people who are asked to respect boundaries, they should know that those of us who have created them are not being mean, rude, or pushing people away. Often we are just simply trying to get our lives in order with ourselves as the priority. Support continuous counseling. Grief happens in waves. It hits us when we least expect it. An anniversary is on the calendar. The smell of a flower, a scent of cologne can remind us of our loved one. And that's when our support circles can continue to be helpful and encourage a return to grief counseling or a support group if needed. Show grace for yourself and others. Our loved ones want us to be happy and healthy. I remember early in a grief support group, we had to write a letter to our loved ones in response to a letter that we wrote that our loved ones had written to us. And as a part of that process, I made a list of all the things that I knew that Therese wanted for me in my life. And I made a list of all the things that I want for myself in this life. It gave me an opportunity to reflect, to create a checklist for my milestones, and a chance to acknowledge the areas where I am still growing as a form of grace for myself. As a society, we are still learning how to talk about death and loss, grief, and what it means for surviving loved ones. Not everyone knows that healthcare professionals and researchers consider the loss of a spouse or partner the most stressful loss a person can endure in their lifetime. The road after loss can be scary, untraveled terrain, but with positive supports that can include grief counseling, we will fearlessly move forward. Thank you.